Okay, so the last exercise that I want to talk to you about is goal setting, and I want to have you do a visual imagery exercise because we just learned about the power of images. So this is kind of an idea for you to use in your classes, but I want to first give you the background knowledge on goal setting, because goal setting is one of the important skills that we're teaching our students. So we're going to walk through kind of the literature on goal setting, the ABCs approach, and then we're going to do an activity with it, and that'll be kind of the wrap for the day. So the ABCs model is all about how do you set and implement an effective goal, right? So that's what we're going to look at. And many of you are familiar with the SMART goals. That's probably familiar to your students also, SMART goals. But the research is really pretty limited on its effectiveness. It's not that it's not supported at all, because there certainly are pieces of it, especially the specific part. But there's some limitations. And there is also some pieces that are questionable. For instance, the realistic piece, which is emphasized in the SMART goal, is only kind of mixed in terms of literature. So it's not, you'll find some studies that say absolutely it needs to be, other studies that say really not so much. So it's controversial when you look at the whole picture of the literature of whether or not a goal needs to be realistic. The other piece is there seems to be a lot of redundancy, in my opinion, regarding the SMART goals. So sometimes students have a hard time differentiating between these different concepts, and honestly, sometimes I do too. I'm not sure what the value of really spending our time looking at that and trying to differentiate them is versus looking at really kind of important goal characteristics. So based on this information and the fact that one of the most important parts of a goal, challenge, is totally missing from SMART goals, I created a new model called the ABCs model, which is going to really emphasize this challenging piece as the first component for the A, the aim high. So here's the ABCs model, and basically, as you know from the textbook, it has all these different components. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through it kind of as if I was lecturing my class, and then after I'm done with that, I'm going to have you engage in a visual imagery exercise that will demonstrate your knowledge of each of these components. Okay? So first of all, it's important for students to understand that the literature is super consistent and across many different areas, not just academic, personal, all different kinds of things. The higher you aim, the higher you're going to succeed. So the idea here is the higher you aim, the higher you succeed. So I'll often have my students chant. I'll say the higher you aim, and you'll say the higher you succeed, right? I think I get kind of a kick out of that. I do chanting quite a bit in my class. Get them to say that. So if I want to lose weight, I don't want to shoot for 5 pounds, I want to shoot for 50. If I want to do well in school, I don't want to shoot for the C, I want to shoot for the A, right? If I want to, be the McDonald's executive, I don't want to sell 10 hamburgers, I want to sell 10 billion hamburgers, right? So the higher you aim, the higher you achieve. And not always will you always achieve your goal, but usually we're okay with that even when it doesn't happen. I was concerned about this as a counseling psychologist until I came across this study that was way cool. So what we have here is Reynolds and Baird did this really gigantic study with, you can see almost 13,000 students. They basically asked students, what is your goal academically? Are you going to just graduate high school? Are you going for the associates, the bachelor's, the master's, the graduate degree? What are you trying to achieve? They followed these students over the years to see whether or not they achieved that goal. And then they also looked at psychological issues like depression. So if they didn't achieve the goal, they wanted to know, is that going to mean that they were going to have higher levels of depression? What's the cost, basically, emotionally, at setting a goal too high? And what we found from their literature and their study was a couple of things. The first thing that I think is quite interesting is about half achieved their goal, a little less than half did not, and 8%, only 8% actually exceeded their goal. So that means wherever we set the bar, it is not that likely that we're going above it. And that, to me, is a really powerful message, right? So wherever we set that bar, you got about a 50% chance of making it, and you have an 8% chance, really, of going above it. And that, to me, is really very striking news, right? Very striking. The other really important point of this is that there was no emotional cost. So when they compared folks that didn't achieve their goal with folks who did, there was no significant difference in terms of depression. So there was no difference in terms of, negative emotions afterwards. However, those who had higher expectations in the beginning regardless of whether or not they achieved it, actually had less depression later on. So what this speaks to me about is really the power of, we worry, I think, too much about failure, and really we're pretty resilient. So most of us are going to be okay. If I set out to lose 50 pounds and I lose 15, I'm like, not bad, I set out to get the A, I got the B, I'll get the A next time. Now, obviously, there's individual differences, and some people are crushed by not making the mark. So I don't want to, when you're looking at literature, you're looking at groups of people. Obviously, there will be exceptions to the rule all the time. But by and large, most of us are pretty resilient. So even if we don't make the mark, we're going to be okay, and it's going to work out okay, and our depression isn't really that high. So that's the A for aim high, right? The challenge component. The B is believe in yourself, which is all about that self-efficacy, which, as you know, is sprinkled out through the entire text. I'm a giant fan of building self-efficacy. We need to believe in ourselves, because if you don't believe you can, you're not going to put forth the effort that is required for you to do that. So if I think I can't get a Ph.D., I'm not going to try hard enough to even get that Ph.D., right? So you have to believe that you can. Self-efficacy is really important. And it's really important when you run into a roadblock, when there's some kind of setback, when there's some kind of problem. So that is really critical. So that's kind of key, that we need to make sure that our students believe in themselves. You can't do goals as if it's a paper process. We're people, we have affect and emotions, and all of this kind of ties into the goal-setting process. In addition, we have the motivational element, which is the C, care and commit. So we need our students to care about it. Well, maybe I think I can, but I don't want to, right? Then that's not going to lead to high levels of effort either. So we need to be committed to it, and we have to care about the goal. So intrinsic motivation is very, very powerful. Very powerful. We've got to make sure our students understand the power of it. And here's a study that speaks to, you can see the red line there is those who have a high level of commitment versus those who have a low level of commitment. And the high level of commitment really outperformed low level in all cases, but if the goal was challenging, that became even more important, that you were more committed, right? So high levels of commitment is really essential when we help our students set and work towards their goals. We do have to be specific. So the SMART goals, that's probably the most meaningful part of the SMART goal process, is to be specific. And although mom loves to say do your best, actually these goals, we actually don't do our best when you say do your best, because what does that mean? How do I know I've reached it? It's not descriptive enough, it's not clear enough, so we have to be more specific. In fact, the research is very clear that when you say do your best, you don't do your best. So instead, say what that best would look like. Really specify it and let us know what that looks like. So we need to help our students be specific. And I know in my class, that's one of the things they struggle the most with when they're setting goals is, I want to do well. Well, what does that mean? You have to be really clear about it. And if it means this, we got to make it mean this, because it also has to be a high, challenging one. And then I got to make you believe that you can, right? We got to work and help them establish that self-efficacy and care and commit to that goal. So these are all very important. And then, of course, they have to self-reflect. Because if you don't monitor the goal progress, it's very unlikely to actually have high levels of achievement. So whether you're working towards an A and you're monitoring your progress, or you're working towards a personal goal of running a marathon, you're monitoring how fast you're running and how long you're running, you need to kind of keep track of that to make sure you're shifting in the direction that you want to be moving in. So that's the process. So now we're going to wrap up with an activity. And I like to use visual imagery a lot in my classes because it's very powerful. We remember images better than words. Remember the picture superiority effect. So I'm going to ask if I'm going to just put you into pairs, and I'm going to give you a letter that designates one of the components, A, B, C, or S, and you will need to come up with an image that you'll draw. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be artistic. In fact, stick figure kinds of things work just fine. I mean, think about icons on the phone. Are they that fancy? No, they're not. Simple images work really well. So don't go elaborate if you don't have to, but I'm just going to put you into teams, give you a letter. I'm going to ask you to come up with a visual image that you think captures that component, and then we'll just share that really briefly, and then you can think about how you could use imagery in your classes also to help them learn the context. So I'll give the two of you A, I'm going to give the two of you B, I'm going to have Zoe and Joe work here with C, and then I'll have the two of you work with S. Okay. All right, folks, we're going to come back together. together and just go ahead and quickly share what you came up with. So what do we have over here for the A? Oops.
And we have an arrow with the H aiming at the wall.
That's very good, very cool. All right.
That's the bullseye.
Good teamwork.
This would be kind of like a little.
Oh, there we go. They wanted crayons. Oh, we didn't have all the colors to help them out. All right. What do we have for B? What did you come up with?
Like three.
We have 3. Okay, that's all right.
Let's use this one, but it's kind of like theirs. Somebody climbing a mountain with the sun, believe in yourself.
Yeah. Climbing a mountain to believe in yourself. All right. And C?
I was thinking about just like a red cross, since that's sort of a universal sign for caring. But then you sort of were considering putting a cross inside a heart, possibly just doing a heart for caring and commitment, because love is about caring and it's about committing.
Like it. Very good. And Patty, what do you have?
This is going to be quite cyclical in nature. Specify and self-reflect. I too did a bullseye because it's specific. You want to aim for your goal in the middle, and then the self-reflection piece comes in because wherever your arrow lands on the bullseye, that's when you can make adjustments as needed.
So very nice. You guys are very creative. Now think about the visual imagery piece of this and how you could really use this in other parts of the course too, not just for the goal setting model, but you see how all of a sudden now you're asking students to process the content, get engaged with the content. So you do like a mini lecture and then you give them a chance to engage with the content. And then what you could even do is you could have a designated photographer. Somebody goes around and takes pictures of all these. They could be plugged into their Evernote account. They could be plugged into, the shared files, in our course management system. There's ways to use that would help them as a study tool. They could even be plugged in as flashcards, right? On one side's this, and then on the back is the meaning behind it to really help them learn. And I think, Donna, you were saying it's a great way even for presentation preparation, because when you think about what images would help me communicate this, instead of randomly picking it, let's really process this because it helps you really evaluate the content in a more meaningful way. So any questions, comments, or reactions to the visual imagery or goal setting piece to it?
Part of your brain to think how you're going to apply this information visually. So it's a stretch.
It's a little bit of work, right? Not that easy, especially you folks at our point. Yes.
I'm thinking, I've never done this in my classes before, but I'm thinking introducing this right before picture superiority effect and then the Mayer research will just make that connection that much greater when the research does come into play.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent. Sure.
I like the idea of a document. But there'll be students in there, and maybe that's something they do really well, and they're not really comfortable speaking up. So here they have a chance now to take that skill and have it contribute to the group in a way that they might not have had that opportunity. So engaging them differently in recognition of what they can contribute is important.
And you have research to back up while you're doing it. So it's not like a silly little task that you're having to do. You have research that supports the picture superiority effect. We've got Mayer's, visual imagery piece. So you're kind of tucking that research, putting it into practice. And it really can be very simple images, but you could also, like if you have a student who really is like, I don't want to do this, it pains me to try to draw a stick figure, you could also have them look on their phone look for an image. It doesn't have to be only something that's drawn. You can really use technology to kind of help with the issue as well. So, well, I hope that you found today to be valuable and helpful to you as you think about how to take the student success content and put it into the class and tuck in the research and tuck in all the other kinds of content and put the research into practice through active learning strategies such as this one. And I certainly encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments, and we'll certainly, we can meet in one-on-one, and we'll meet again throughout the semester to make sure that everybody's on board and able to move forward with their class. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.